Right, hello there. Get back into the swing of things now. Um, so we're in Genesis 38, and we're going to read the whole chapter, or we'll see how it goes. But just to tell you, before we start our reading for this week's Bible break, we're back. But like I said, we're back into the swing of it now. Genesis 38 is actually a parenthesis, or it's like bracketed. There are brackets around it in the sense that it's not part of the main story of Joseph, which we will pick up on again next week in chapter 39. And it's important to note this to avoid confusion and discouragement, that though, as we shall see, Genesis 38 has its own value, we shouldn't be, we shouldn't in a confused way associate it with the main narrative. I mean, I can think offhand of two classic instances of parentheses in the New Testament in Paul's letters, where, for example, the letter to the Romans, we've got a small parenthesis, chapters 9 to 11, where Paul deals with, let's just call it the Jewish problem, his sadness that the Jews refuse the gospel. And then in Ephesians, there's a larger parenthesis which takes up a large part. I'd have to check whether it's the greater part, but it's certainly a large part of the letter. So there we are, offhand, a couple of parentheses that come to mind in the Old Testament. We've got to use this when we read the Bible to understand where we're at, what we're looking at, and what is the point of it. So I'm hoping to sort of shed a little bit of light on this parenthesis today. We're in Genesis chapter 38. The story of Judah and Tamar is the subheading or heading in my NIV, reading from my NIV as usual. Normally we're going to read the whole chapter, but it's not long, but it's long enough. We'll see how we get on. There's just one or two fairly important things, I think, once again, which I need to draw your attention to. Like I say, this chapter has its own value. Let's see what it is, or let's try to figure out what it is. Here we go. Genesis 38, 1 to 30, the whole chapter. Here we go. At that time, Judah left his brothers. Now, that's the only link, really, to the story of Joseph, I suppose. Apart from things, in general going downhill since they've done what they've done to Joseph. But it's at that time. At what time? Well, at the time that Joseph is in Egypt. And they are still at home with dad. So at that time, Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a man of Adullam named Hira. Sorry, I'm noticing that the light seems to keep changing. Went down to stay with a man of Adullam named Hira. There Judah met the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua. He married her and lay with her. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son who was named She conceived again and gave birth to a son and named him Onan. She gave birth to still another son and named him Shelah. It was at Kezib that she gave birth to him. Judah got a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight. That's all we're told. So the Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, lie with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to produce offspring for your brother. So this is already a custom, it seems, from the beginning in Israel, which will be become part of, or which will form part of the law of Moses eventually in its entirety. But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. So whenever he lay with his brother's wife, so they make this out to be an ongoing thing as opposed to a one-off thing, which I always thought it was. But there we are. Whenever he lay with his brother's wife, he spilled his seed on the ground to keep from producing offspring for his brother. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so he put him to death also. Right, let's have a pause there, because this might not seem to be a particularly sort of edifying few verses that we've just read, but I think it is from the point of view of noting that just as Israel will find their salvation in Egypt pretty shortly, so at the introduction of this chapter, we have another little excerpt here which demonstrates in the Bible, authentically, honestly, the impossibility of racial purity for Israel, let alone anyone else. That Judah, one of the first Israelites, this is the book of Genesis, the book of origins, and we are told that Judah, one of the first Israelites, married a Canaanite woman. And he had kids with her. So if you like, and if you want to look at things that way, the Israelite race, the Jewish race, the Jewish race was corrupted from the word go. And that apparent fact is underscored by the fact that the offspring behave badly, and both the first two sons there are put to death, to the extent that Judah himself feels that he has to protect his third son and not give him to his daughter-in-law, so that she can raise up a posterity for that son, plus the first son, Judah, heir. So there we are. Part of the here we've got what we saw earlier with Noah, I believe, and even Abraham, and there's this element of propaganda in the Bible concerning the corrupting influences, if you like, in and around Israel. But we're about to see in what follows something of a corrective to that approach and attitude towards other people and other races, nations. So let's carry on. I might cut it short and resume it, but we'll carry on for the minute. So then Judah, verse 11 now, I think. Judah then said to his daughter-in-law, Tamar, live as a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up, for he thought he may die too, just like his brothers, the way things are going. So Tamar went to live in her father's house. After a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. When Judah recovered from his grief, he went up to Timnah, to the men who were shearing the sheep, and his friend Hira, the Adullamite, so these are the Canaanite people that he's been mixing with in the first place, went with him. When Tamar was told, your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear his sheep, she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and then sat down at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah, for she saw that though Shelah had now grown up, she had not been given to him as his wife. So Judah wants to protect his third son. She, on the other hand, feels hard done by that she isn't being given the third son. And so for me to resume, because I think I will resume, otherwise time is going to march on, she behaves more or less like a prostitute here in making herself available, if I can put it like that, to her, to who? To her father-in-law, Judah. But before she goes to bed with him, she takes the precaution of taking three of the things that he has bought with him. I leave you the job of finishing this chapter and checking out the details. But I can tell you, to resume, that she takes three things that Judah had with him before going to bed with him. Judah then trots off, and it turns out that she's pregnant by her father-in-law. Shua, the name is, I think. And when it is discovered that she's pregnant, though she has not been given or not had the third son of her father-in-law, so it looks as though she's committed adultery and now she's become pregnant. Well, the verdict falls pretty swiftly that she must be executed. She must be burned. There's no sympathy for her. But as all this is going ahead and going to take place, she produces the three things that Judah left with her, and before Judah himself, and she says to Judah and to everybody else, well, who do these belong to then? Because she's become pregnant from sleeping with her father-in-law. And so the question is, who's the father? Who did I sleep with? Who do these things belong to which he left at my place when he slept with me? And so Judah has to recognize his own fault rather than hers, and he does so. He says, in effect, I'm more guilty. Here we are about to burn her for the terrible crime which she is supposed to have committed. But actually, I recognize that, the shame is mine, and that I'm more guilty than she is. And that's an important thing, is it not? That instead of just putting forward the corrupting influences of within Israel and of the surrounding nations that have contact with Israel, and Israel has contact with them, or Judah, to be precise in this case. What we see in this second half of the chapter is this somewhat extraordinary, at least in the ancient world, as far as I'm aware, this somewhat extraordinary capacity which the Israelites have for self-criticism. For being prepared to admit his own fault here in the case of Judah, his own guilt. Or again, this is the counter-propaganda to say that, before you make the propaganda which condemns the nations around you, consider yourselves. Consider what you do. Consider what you have done. And put your own house in order. And this, of course, once again, is most perfectly summarized or encapsulated by the Lord Jesus himself, when he says in his own teaching that before you think about taking the beam out of your brother's eye, sorry, I've got that entirely the wrong way around. Self-criticism, autocriticism. Sorry, before you think about taking the speck of dust out of your brother's eye, you'd better think about taking the beam out of your own. So that really is, we've got propaganda and counter-propaganda, and that really is the lesson of this useful, like I say, it's not because it's a parenthesis that it's without value, far from it, this useful parenthesis that we have here. But we shall return, of course, to the story of Joseph, the proper, in the next chapter, chapter 39, and I'll see you then. Bye for now.